Hello and welcome to day 2 of the Greenlight Guru True Quality Virtual Summit, the 3-day event designed to provide actionable takeaways you can implement in your own company to innovate faster, stay ahead of regulatory changes, and use quality as a strategic asset to grow your device business. This session is on navigating the 1-year EU MDR extension. My name is Wade Schrader, Medical Device Guru here at Greenlight Guru, and I will be your moderator for today's event. We've got a really special session scheduled for you today. I know our speaker, Chris Mauch, is really looking forward to sharing his experience and expertise on EU MDR and what needs to be top of mind today. Before we dive too deep into today's presentation and introduce our speaker and his company, KPMG, I'm going to touch on a few items real quick. First, this session is going to run for about 45 minutes in total and will include a Q&A session at the end where Chris has been kind enough to answer your questions. So I encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation as they come up in the box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as time permits. This entire session will be recorded. This is our last session for the day. Be sure to tune in to day 3 tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're interested in learning about the post-COVID value shift and how medtech companies can capitalize, I encourage you to make sure you're registered for the first session tomorrow and use your unique link to tune in. If you aren't already signed up, you can register for the next session and over 20 others at virtual-summit.greenlight.guru. I'd also like to share a few words about Greenlight Guru and why we put on this free virtual summit. If you've been on one of our training sessions before, then you know we put on these because improving the quality of life is our mission here at Greenlight Guru. Likely a similar mission as many of you at today's summit. Anything we can do as an organization that helps device makers bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker and with less risk aligns with that mission. We're constantly looking for ways to fulfill that mission, whether that's through hosting free events and training sessions, through partnering with world-class medical device consultants, or through our award-winning medical device QMS software. If you'd like to learn more about why medical device companies from across the globe are moving away from paper-based general-purpose quality management systems and adopting our purpose-built medical device quality management software, I encourage you to head over to www.greenlight.guru after today's presentation to schedule your free personalized one-on-one demo. Now, on to the bulk of today's presentation. Let me give a proper introduction to today's presenter. Chris is a leader in KPMG's life science consulting practice, specializing in helping his clients solve complex business problems, realize efficiencies, and navigate through difficult changes. He has amassed over a decade of experience leading engagements across a wide variety of pharmaceutical and medical device clients in the regulatory affairs, supply chain, and operations spaces, and is an active RAPS member. Prior to joining KPMG, Chris spent the first 7 years of his career across multiple roles in domestic and international regulatory affairs at Abbott Laboratories in Chicago, Illinois. So without further ado, let me hand it over to your presenter, Chris Mauch.
Thanks, Wade. I appreciate that. And everyone joining me from most likely the comfort of your homes. It's nice to be talking with you. Obviously, giving a virtual presentation is something that is generally less than ideal. It's always more fun to be together in person, but I do hope you're all doing well with everything that's happening in the world today, and that you've all had some time to kind of focus on what matters most and what's important as we are kind of bombarded left and right by news stories and things that happen almost on an hourly basis. Today, we're going to talk about another hot topic. That is EU MDR. I feel like we have spent a lot of time talking about this over the years. Some would say we've talked about it too much and are ready to stop hearing the phrase EU MDR, but it's not going away. It keeps coming back. It keeps getting extended, and we're here today to talk about navigating the 1-year extension that has recently been implemented. So without further ado, I'd like to get right into this. And just very quickly, and I need to say this coming from a Big Four consulting firm, and some of the services that we describe within this presentation may not be permissible for an audit client of ours or an affiliate or related entity. So with that aside, I'd like to just talk about our itinerary on this discussion. I'll give a brief introduction on myself. We'll talk about MDR. Where's the industry at today? Management consultant's perspective on MDR and the extension, 365 days and counting, and May 26, 2021 and beyond. I must admit that as I prepared these last two bullets, 365 days and counting and May 26, 2021, I had to check myself probably 10 times because I just kept seeing this as a typo. It's still very tough to accept and digest, but it's there. We're going to talk a little bit about that. For myself, as Wade mentioned, I have a decade of experience in regulatory affairs and operations in the life science space. I have a team of folks that are targeted and focused on the delivery of regulatory quality and ops projects at both, the largest pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturers in the world. And we've delivered multiple MDR programs at some of the largest life science clients, both here in the States as well as internationally. I myself am based out of Chicago, and doing my best to try and enjoy the warm weather while it's here for at least 60 days before we go back into the cold. So again, nice to be here with you folks today. Hopefully you find this talk valuable. So EU MDR, where is the industry at today? A lot of people are so focused on other things, we've stepped away from this topic for a few months, and it's good to come back. Over the past few years, KPMG has had a partnership with the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, and we've written thought leadership with them and surveyed their member base as to the medical device members of RAPS and their organization's preparedness for upcoming MDR. Last fall, we released our most recent survey, and we asked respondents a myriad of questions, but one of the key questions is, what is the current status of EU MDR remediation efforts in your organization? So out of 250 respondents, again, all verified, certified RAPS members, you had 46% that said, my organization has started remediation efforts that is on target to meet the compliance timeline by utilizing the transitional provisions. Another 27% said, my organization has started efforts and is on target to meet the compliance timeline of May 2020. To those 27% of respondents, I salute you and I applaud you. For 15% of respondents, they stated that their organization has not started MDR remediation efforts and is currently working on MDD recertification to leverage the transitional provisions under MDR. These folks are in a tough spot because as of October 2019, really only a few months back, these folks were only heads down on MDD just so that they could then move into the transitional provision space. With the final 12% saying, my organization has not started MDR remediation efforts and will not be able to meet the timeline at all. These are obviously very telling results. This shows industry has made progress. It has come a long way since this regulation was first brought to light and it was first introduced, but there's still a long ways to go. And like it or not, although if this was a normal world, we would have already passed the date of enforcement, we now have one more year, but I'd like to keep everyone focused today on a year is a very short amount of time. I'd like to take a look at what needs to be accomplished in this year, where should you be focusing your priorities, and how can you hopefully move into this group of 27% that says, you know what, we're ready to go and bring it on. And that's what we're going to dive a little bit into today. There's good news and bad news with this extension and with MDR as a whole. The good news is that we have a little bit more time to figure this all out together, answer questions, and assemble a puzzle. Manufacturers are still asking, how do I align everyone in my organization to the same priorities at the same time? And by the way, all these people are now dispersed working from home due to a global pandemic. Consulting firms, how do I identify, communicate, and address the risks that my clients face in a timely manner? And how do I interpret vast amounts of data that are flowing at me and sometimes conflicting pieces of data? What's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's inaccurate? Balancing all of that in this environment is very, very challenging. Notified bodies, obviously, are asking, how do I ensure requirements are met for my clients as well as for myself? And finally, the commission is saying, how do I ensure that this process keeps moving forward? clearly, it took them until April 17th to make the delay of the MDR from 2020 to 2021. I'm sure that's something that they did not want to do, but these are all things that need to be weighed and balanced in the grand scheme of things. And we're all really working together for better or for worse in order to achieve the timelines that are out in front of us. The bad news is that although the MDR at the skin deep layer is focused on strengthening regulatory platform to ensure patient safety and improve transparency towards medical products, there's a lot more to it. Quality assurance, regulatory affairs, R&D, supply chain, IT, even project management consideration need to be taken into account in order to successfully achieve MDR compliance less than 1 year from today. That is everything from prioritizing updates to your SOPs, making sure that you have the appropriate documentation in place from an R&D perspective, periodic safety update reports, your post-market surveillance system is ready to go, ensuring that your technical files have been updated and are in the correct templates. You have a plan for SSCP. On supply chain side of things, making sure that you've got economic operator strategy figured out, determining that you have labeling conversion of product and timelines for cutover identified. IT side of things, implementing the IT changes that are prescribed in the regulation, make sure that you have a plan in place for UTMED, even though it's currently delayed right now, it's still coming. And from a project and change management perspective, making sure that you've got someone steering this entire ship away from a problematic iceberg, making sure you have someone watching over the budgets, making sure that any of your assumptions and your interdependencies and your risks are tracked, cataloged, and reviewed across multiple functions. Whenever you start getting more people at the table, it becomes more challenging to address concerns and problems as they pop up. And then ensuring that the organization is ready for this change, for the long-term change that MDR will bring to your organization, which we'll touch on in the back half of the presentation. So from the consulting perspective, what do we see? Overall, and this is not a news flash to anyone, I hope, MDR is not an isolated regulation. It's part of a global landscape that organizations need to respond to. It is incorporating feedback to improve product safety and efficacy. It's managing clinical data to support device performance. And it's really shining light on the transparency of reporting, making sure it's available. But these are all things that exist under MDSAP, ISO 13485, MedDev, and now MDR. This is kind of the way that we've been trending. So it's not something that is completely shocking or should be completely shocking to everyone. But if we go back to the iceberg slide, you need to remember that we're balancing many different organizations and their own priorities as we move towards these three key pillars. And that's what's really been so challenging for folks as they've gone on their MDR compliance journey. There are beacons of hope out there, and I put a few of these together in the theme of this voyage that I'm taking you on. Number one, as an industry, we've seen this before. MDD took over 20 years to develop and implement. As it was in '93, manufacturers and notified bodies are learning the processes and the roles required today for MDR. The accessibility to resources and experts from 1993 to 2020 has increased significantly. And if there's anything that we've all learned in the past 3 months, we've learned to work in a different environment. We learned how to stay close with others. We learned how to ask questions virtually, attend conferences virtually, and be more connected. Whereas maybe before February of this year, we were used to going off to a conference physically, getting some information for a few days, bringing it back to the organization. Now things are actually flowing at an even faster speed, and that's a good thing when it comes to an evolving regulation with multiple interdependencies like MDR. Don't overdo it is the second beacon of hope. If your best practices under MDD were already followed by your organization, the gap that you have to close to get to MDR compliance probably isn't as wide as you think it is. You need to be focused in this next year in this final push to ensure your policies and procedures are in place in the event of a finalized guidance. I'll pick on something like PSUR for an example. Moving on, don't forget that patient health and safety are the guiding light of this entire regulation. There are end users at the back end of every single device that an organization makes. And although we are living in a very complex world, with COVID and everything else going on, even just the complexity of this regulation itself, there may be some flexibility on minor or administrative nonconformances, but you should have a plan in place now to address those with your notified body as they come up in the subsequent MDR audits that are either ongoing for you now or will be ongoing once the COVID restrictions lift. We're in this together as the fourth beacon. Keep open lines of communication with your notified body. Continue attending virtual industry events and workshops, and don't assume anything. Ask questions. This does not mean just field random questions to every single presentation that you go to. This really is in the light of stay in touch with your colleagues. Ask your friends and your coworkers, what are they doing? How are they solving problems? And don't necessarily ask this only in the lens of MDR. Ask this just generally. Anyone that you've worked with who has helped roll out a very large change or a very large program, managing those cross-functional interdependencies are really where the rubber meets the road in the last 365 days that we're all entering. And ensuring that your communication lines are open are really the key to success and failure, in my opinion. Now 365 days and counting. I have to be honest with you, and I probably guarantee I'm not the only person on this call that feels this way today. I feel like this. 357 days, 8 hours, 41 minutes. This feels kind of familiar, doesn't it? We've been here before. In fact, we were here a year ago having this exact conversation. As everyone knows, the European Parliament on 17th of April, 2020, stated that they'd like to postpone the application of the regulation by 1 year to allow authorities and manufacturers to prioritize the fight against coronavirus. We all know, and I've touched on this multiple times, and I'm sure you guys have been in other sessions that have talked on this, that coronavirus, COVID-19, has had a very large impact to every way of life as we've known it. And we're now working to restabilize and try and get back to being our efficient selves in the workplace and even at home and in our personal lives. That stated, there are some key points that we need to keep in our sights as we go into these last 365 days. Number one, as of June 2nd, and this was yesterday, there are only 14 notified bodies designated under MDR. If you guys recall, at the end of 2019, the plan was to have 20 designated. So in my eyes, there's still a bottleneck there. UDEMET is not functional and its planned establishment remains postponed. We know that this is going to come eventually. We are all aware that this delay to MDR has given a little bit more time to tick and tie some of the key items that are the baseline requirements of MDR. But don't forget, from when MDR goes live, the amount of time from MDR go live to UDEMET go live is going to be shorter than it originally was. That's not moving. Notified bodies remain focused on the extension of MDD certs due to the impact of COVID-19. Right now, we don't know whether MDR certifications of new products are going to resume immediately after the pandemic, who decides when the restrictions that are in place actually lift, or whether these COVID-19 related restrictions, at least from a travel perspective, will remain. If so, when we look at the May 2021 deadline as our kind of guiding light, there could be very large capacity problems associated with new product certifications on the horizon, due solely to the fact that people have not been able to get on a plane and do some of the certifications and some of the in-person audits and discussions that need to happen as part of this regulation. And finally, friendly reminder to all of you, transitional provisions remain intact. The transitional provisions did not move one additional year with the delay of MDR. They still remain at May 26, 2024, meaning that if you are using this entire additional year just to get yourself ready to then go into transitional provisions, one could argue you've actually lost a year depending on how prepared you actually were. And so these are just a few key points that we need to keep at kind of the front of our minds as we look at this 357 days, because I could start highlighting holidays and times of the year where people are not working so much. And this will just wind down so quickly. Again, I feel like it was just yesterday I was giving this exact same talk, and it was a year ago. It's amazing to be here now, and it's really an incredible sight to see how industry and how everyone will react with this additional time. But just remember that it goes by fast, and be very aware of the potential bottlenecks that are out there that I've highlighted here in these 4 bullets. So, action plan for MDR leaders. If I was going to give you, this specific group list of 4 items to prioritize as we move into this 365-day countdown, what would they be? Number 1, Class 1 devices. Keep this at the front of your mind. Make sure you have a strategy in place, stakeholders are aligned in your organization to address non-sterile, non-measuring devices prior to May 26th of 2021. Don't forget about this. This is a very key sticking point for many organizations. It will also deal with up-classification and reclassification of some of your devices. So keep that at the forefront of your minds. Number two, procedure updates. Make sure that you have your procedures at a minimum drafted, ideally written and reviewed. If you're still in the process of developing your procedures and finalizing them, make sure that your team has an organization or has a strategy in place to address and communicate this during the certification audits, meaning that once things begin to open up or as things begin to open up again after this pandemic and audits start to take place and you're in front of auditors and people have been at home, make sure that there's a very clearly articulated story to be able to tell as to why you may have some procedures that are still in process. Although, before we go to audit readiness, I would really say, make sure your procedures are written and reviewed. Make sure your procedures are written and reviewed. Make sure your procedures are written and reviewed. This is the last year countdown, and this really should be something that is tied off by now. For audit readiness, make sure you have an audit prep team, and you begin identifying and naming required resources for the upcoming audits if you've not gone through them already. Don't assume that all your pieces are in place. Check and recheck. Mock audits, putting a plan in place, determining if you're using consulting firms, who is going to support what during this process, making sure that all of your folks are trained. MDR has changed many different areas and many different functions of an organization, making sure that people that are going to be interacting with auditors are prepared to address the questions coming their way will be critical. And again, there's a COVID angle on this as well, because we have all been disconnected from the physical in-person space. And I do suspect that there will be a little bit of a re-ramp up once we're all back in the office and dealing with some of the audit-related items that we're all used to dealing with on a normal day. And that may take a little bit of time and adjustment. So planning and wargaming and putting a strategy in place earlier rather than later is key. And finally, goes without saying, remediation review. Make sure that you have gone through the files that you've already remediated with a fine-tooth comb, noted any of the gaps that exist, and put a plan in place to address those gaps as they lay. Odds are a very large majority of folks here at least had some of this in process already, because we were all anticipating up until April that this was going to be, the rule of the land as of May 2020. Now that there's another year in place, it's a great opportunity to go through and ensure that you have all the items identified. And if you had something that you were going into your audits with or preparing for your audits, you were a little bit nervous about, this is the time to identify it. Do it now. Don't let this additional year burn away. A 365-day checklist for enabling MDR compliance. This is a wall of text, but it's important, so I'll only touch on a few items here and leave the rest for you folks to kind of pick through in your own time. But this is just meant to show the large amount of cross-functional oversight that's needed in order to make sure that you're ready to go on May 26, 2021. Regulatory affairs, technical file remediation, clinical, CEPs, PMCFs, CERs, making sure you have a medical writing strategy in place, medical safety, PMSP and PSUR development, make sure you have a post-market surveillance system in place and updated. Make sure that you have master data strategy, your quality assurance plan is intact, SOPs have all been updated, any changes incorporated. Make sure you've done a ISO 13485 assessment on your QMS. Make sure you've done an IT impact assessment. Do you have MDR system architecture in place? Has there been a 3-year technology roadmap put in place for sustainability post-MDR implementation? How are you going to address UNIMED? Manufacturing, UDI impact assessment, and making sure that there are packaging line changes and plans to make those changes and updates in place. Ensure that there's an economic operator strategy in place, and then obviously ensuring that your organization has a robust training communication plan so that all functions are notified of impacts or rapid adjustments that may need to be made on the fly as we lead up to and pass through May 26th of 2021. Which leads us to the time beyond May 26th, 2021. Unfortunately, EU MDR does not stop just at the date of enforcement. It's here to stay. I think that everyone on the call today acknowledges that. But what does that really mean? If we go full circle back to how I started our presentation and we talk about the surveys that we've done with RAPS members in the medical device space, we asked the same question 2 years in a row, with blue responses being the survey in 2018. and the purple responses being the survey in 2019. As you can see, the question is, has your company assessed the changes needed for your organization to be able to sustain MDR compliance with increased amounts of effort required? In 2018, 41% of organizations had not evaluated long-term maintenance to maintain compliance. In 2019, that number dropped to 3, which is a positive sign. People have started thinking longer term as they've become more mature in this whole process. The second option was we've evaluated certain functions. In 2018, 11% said that was their answer, and 2019, nobody answered to that. The third item, we developed a plan, but we haven't identified resources or budget. This stays pretty much static from 2018 to 2019, meaning people understand that there is going to be a sustainability impact. There's going to be a long-term need to manage all the requirements that MDR brings upon an organization. But we haven't really tapped the right individuals and secured funding in order to do it. And then finally, we've developed a plan with resources and budget. This is great to see. Between 2018 and 2019, you've seen that a very large majority of people have said, you know what, now we get this regulation completely. We understand its impact to our organization, and we need to ensure that we have dollars and people available to maintain some of the requirements that will not go away as a result of MDR. We like to think of MDR as a sprint to compliance, and as soon as you cross the finish line in May 2021, then you realize you just started a marathon. The race is not over. It just turns into a much longer and maybe a little bit slower effort, but it's still there. And sustainability and making sure your organization is prepped for this will kind of separate the winners from the losers as you go into the post-MDR era, post-date of enforcement era. But what does sustainability mean? Where is the need for sustainability? These items are all kind of interlinked like a chain. MDR puts an increased workload on an organization. You'll need more resources to perform updates to technical documentation that span multiple functional areas and organizations within a corporation. UMED will require all manufacturers to put a change control process and ensure that there are timely submissions to the database, even if it's delayed. It's still coming. Data management and master data management will require generation of clinical data to support the safety and performance required on an annual or biannual basis, depending on device classes. And finally, there's new processes in place. Every functional area in an organization needs to adopt these new processes, procedures to manage requirements that are outlined by the regulation itself. At a detailed level, how do we view approaching MDR sustainability? So you've now ensured that you are compliant with the regulation, whether this is at the date of enforcement, whether it's utilizing the transitional provisions, but certainly by May 26, 2024. Moving beyond that date of compliance, how do you stand up and how do you focus on a sustainability program? It's really tri-phase. Phase one is assess your current state processes post-remediation. 2 is perform a high-level organizational assessment. 3 is propose sustainability model and recommendations to your leadership and your teams. Going to phase one, you want to be looking at current state processes as they exist. What has changed as a result of your remediation activities and where are there sticking points that are still there even though you're now compliant? Make sure that you've established expectations with your cross-functional team members and groups as to what you're going to need and when you're going to need it. A great example there would be medical safety, updating their documentation on an annual or biannual basis per the requirements of MDR. If other organizations are not aligned to that and there are inputs needed by the medical safety team, this is going to be something that will slow down your business, and it could potentially pose a compliance risk if you were to be audited at a certain point in time as you're aligning timelines and data management. Additionally, identify the needs to support post-MDR future state process is key because this will be ongoing, similarly to how the MDR remediation process worked. Standing up a long-term sustainability strategy will take time and it won't be built overnight. Phase two, you want to begin focusing on impacted roles and gaps in the organization. Are there spots where you previously didn't need folks and now you do? Or are there spaces where maybe folks can be repurposed depending on the organization that you're in? Make sure you're planning for those organizational changes now, even though you may be going through and finalizing the last pieces of your remediation strategy. Make sure that you've got that in the back of your mind, because that will require budget. You'll need to begin setting a budget to support your future state processes that are here to stay, will not go away. And that then will move you to phase 3, where you can propose the recommendations of process and your organization. Make sure you have a clear schedule and objectives identified for the changes to your organization as a result of MDR, and then create a change plan for those organizational changes and ensure the leadership is aligned with that strategy. There are additional details here below that are methodology and activities that we use as we have gone through sustainability process with clients, but I will leave this to you folks to digest just in the interest of time. So in closing, our favorite thing to do is leave an action plan for MDR teams. And we like to think of this as Monday, next month, and 3 months from now. So after we're done with the Greenlight Virtual Summit, and we're done for the rest of the week, and we go into our weekend, and we get back into work on Monday, and we're recentering ourselves on MDR and what needs to happen in the next calendar year. How should you be thinking? First and foremost, assess the current state of your program. Identify missing functions and stakeholders. If applicable, do you have a strategy for Class 1? I would assume most of you do, but if you don't, you need to define that immediately. Truly, not even on Monday, after this talk today. Finally, begin a gap assessment on your remediation program. A whole year, although we've been talking about how short it is, we are at the beginning of that 1-year countdown right now, and this is a great time to really identify, are there any gotchas that you haven't touched on yet that could be addressed given the 12 months we have out in front of us? The reality is, as many of you know, most gotchas take months and months and months and months to fix. So not jumping on those immediately could wind up biting you sometime down the line. Before we move to next 30 days, oh yeah, COVID-19, let's not forget about that. What is the plan for how your organization is going to address its upcoming audits, its planning for the audits? And in the context of everything I mentioned here, how is that going to be done safely and efficiently with the impacts of COVID-19 right now? Fortunately, we're seeing many clients begin to reopen their doors slowly, bringing back either percentages of their workforce or their entire workforce in the coming weeks and months. So hopefully some of the remote impacts that you may have seen will go away naturally as organizations kind of refocus on being in person. But that will take time. And in that downtime, ensure that you have a plan in place to stay connected with the right folks, and the right folks have communication channels that are available to communicate any risks and issues that they may see as you wind down to final date of enforcement and your ultimate certification. In the next 30 days, as we look into July and we get past the holiday, align on an audit strategy and an owner. Make sure you have a rehearsal plan. Ensure that you have folks that are designated point people are going to be owning the preparation and review of all documentation prior to those audits. Make sure you review your current progress against that strategy and identify any gaps. Ensure that there's nothing left unturned. Make sure all of your procedures are in process or have been completed, and then look for those in process, as I mentioned before. Make sure you have a very clean and a very clear story as to why they are still being updated at the time of your certifications. And talk to your notified body. They're busy, busier than ever, but are your plans and timelines aligned? What has changed for your notified body as a result of COVID-19? Are there additional considerations that need to be incorporated into your planning with the notified bodies? Develop a product transition timeline. Make sure that you have a plan in place in the 90 days. So as we start getting out past summer and we're now into the fall, make sure that you have a plan for any products that may be reclassified, anything that may need to change, and how are you also going to manage labeling changes that will impact your organization, your organization's products. Begin working on your sustainability strategy. Remember, this is not going away once we get to May 2021. Ideally, the date of enforcement will not move again, and we will all enter into the post-date of enforcement world, but the sustainability requirements and what is going to stick around your organization in terms of workload and a process perspective is here to stay. And if you start thinking about some of the points that I mentioned on my earlier slides now, you'll hopefully be able to navigate some of those bumps and hiccups as they naturally come once you go through your certification. And finally, make sure that you have a clear line of sight on any dependent programs, stakeholders, and budgets, that could be tied to MDR. I don't want to harp on COVID more than I already have because I know it's everywhere right now. But this is something that if you're requiring X amount of budget to complete work for MDR, and I could say maybe you need to finish your work on technical files, getting them in the right format, and you're planning on using X% of resources, but now because of COVID-19, there's been budget restrictions in your organization. Ensure that you have a very clear plan in place to communicate that in the coming months, and make sure that your senior leadership and your organization understands the why and the how of the importance of getting to MDR compliance and the time it may take. And it's something you want to have buttoned up at the 90-day mark, just so that you can utilize the last 8 to 9 months of the year in that final stretch to compliance. So I think, Wade, I am almost exactly on time as we move into the question and answer strategy. It's been a pleasure speaking with all of you guys today. And hopefully this has shined a little bit of light as to the fact that a year is a long time, but at the same time, it's not a tough time. So be diligent, be focused on the tasks that your organization has in front of it, and ensure that you are over communicating if need be right now, so that there are no showstoppers as we get to the end of this extension. Wade, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. This was fantastic. I know I personally really enjoyed it, and I'm sure all of our attendees did as well. So just a few questions coming in, and everybody that's listening, feel free to submit your questions even now to the end. If we don't get to all of them, Chris will get a list and he can respond to you after this session today. So first question is, with the MDR delay, is it still possible to register and CE mark a new medical device product under the MDD before May 26, 2021?
That is the strategy that is being employed right now, and that's probably one of the most popular questions that has been asked. What our clients are doing, a majority of them, are ensuring that they have their MDD certificates recertified for existing products. For any new products, you do have the luxury of that additional year to bring them to market, but I would warn everyone that you will be doing the rework on that product's data and that product's inputs from MDD to MDR compliance in less than a year. So there is a broader organizational strategy that needs to be taken into consideration on, does it make sense to sometimes delay a product launch if it means avoiding rework in the long run. And there's a little more strategy to that in the sustainability side that I'd be happy to discuss more offline. The short answer is yes, but there could be broader long-term impacts as rework is required to come to MDR compliance by the second quarter of 2021.
Awesome, thank you. And then the next question is, given the time that we have to take a second look at things, what areas of our QMS would you recommend taking that second look at?
I think there's a couple of areas, and if we go off of experiences that our clients have faced, I'd break that into kind of a functional specific area, or functional specific answer. We have spent a lot of time looking at the clinical affairs and the medical safety organizations and their policies and procedures, as there have been so many impacts to those groups as a result of MDR. I think that if you are focused on ensuring that you have at least a plan in place for developing a process and the associated policies and procedures, even if there is an absent guidance, that should be kind of the first and foremost that you should be looking at, because in the long run, when we get to the individual date of compliance for each organization, and that's going to be different. Some folks maybe potentially have already gone through and received their certificates. There's going to be questions that even the notified bodies don't have answers to at the time you sit down for your audits. So ensuring you have a plan in place for the functions that have been most impacted by MDR, and I use clinical and medical safety as an example, versus say information technology, is a good strategy. And as there are further updates to guidance on things like PSUR that come out in the remaining months prior to date of enforcement, they can be incorporated into your plans and then inputted into your quality systems.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that answer. And then the next one, kind of getting into the notified body stuff. So, do you think this delay will help with the bottleneck of notified bodies? And what's your recommendation for navigating that bottleneck?
Great question. Uh, I think the challenging part with the notified bodies right now is that, much like most of us, they are unable or unable to go and connect with their clients and be in person, whether that is from an audit perspective. And I know that many of you guys have traveled around the world to meet with your notified bodies and have working sessions over the past years as we've run up to the date of enforcement. Now that's not possible. There are international governmental travel restrictions around the globe that are starting to relax a little bit. But generally speaking, I see that the notified body bottleneck is not going to go away. I think that there's going to be a rush of people, to the earlier question, who are going to be focused on MDD certifications, getting those last items across the goal line before the date of enforcement takes place in 2021. And the notified bodies will be prioritizing that. And meanwhile, there will be the new rush of people that may sit back a little bit or have already sat back since April 17th and said, okay, we have time. And then they will be panicking as we get to the end of this year, and history will repeat itself. So if you want my very honest answer, I think the bottleneck will stay. I think that if you have not identified a notified body, by all means, that is the guiding light, but making the assumption that most people have a notified body secured and identified it, ensuring that there's discussions and strategies in place for mitigating any COVID-related impacts, be it to strategy. Do you have a good line of sight on how they're communicating with the EU Commission on what do audits look like? Will remote audits be a possibility at some point in time? What are their bandwidths? If you can get on a notified body schedule and you can start building things out even months and months and months in advance, get on a schedule, get something confirmed so that then you and your organization can begin working against that timeline. Unfortunately, unless we see a huge tidal wave of new designations in the next 3 months or so, which I do not think we will see just because of everything that's going on, I think that the bottleneck will remain. And I think that those folks that wait until the third or fourth quarter of this year to really put a plan in place are going to be too late. And unfortunately, the notified bodies nor any of these organizations that you all belong to can be faulted, because I don't think anyone was expecting the impact that we've all gone through with COVID back, at the beginning of January going into February.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, yeah, another question, kind of jumping back to the areas of QMS to take a second look. We got a question here. What would you consider the riskiest areas for successful MDR transition?
Ooh. Well, I think that there are a few. I think that obviously, if we look at that big checklist that I had on one of my earlier slides, the things that keep me up at night are economic operators. There's obviously the strategy to ensuring that you have an economic operators plan in place and that all of your associated economic operators have a strategy is very dynamic and very complex. Again, leaning on the COVID thing, but you have to. This has been a very disruptive time that we've gone through. So although we have this additional year to work through, every organization is struggling in one way or another to make sure that things continue to stay plugged in and connected. Economic operators is just one that is so complex and has so many moving pieces that it's something that should be at the front of your mind. Another key item remains the medical safety side of things. The delay and clinical affairs, the delay in some of the guidances and finalized guidances there have caused some organizations to take their time in putting together a plan. Now, obviously, you cannot author a document if there is no guidance in place, because that's really kind of going blind. But you need to have a plan in place. You need to have a plan on how you're going to collect the data as the regulation prescribes. You need to ensure that that's documented. And if you haven't done that, if you've been waiting for some of these guidances to come out and you've been focusing on some of the other items that I had on my checklist, you may find yourself in a difficult situation if you now learn that the only time that you can meet with your notified body is sooner than you thought, and you don't have a concrete plan in place. And then I think the other one, although this sounds like a low-hanging fruit, we've seen a lot of clients go through this exact item, is the technical file review. Putting together an internal audit team and looking at all of your technical files and the work that they've been done. You all know that these are incredibly complex documents. They're living and breathing. And if you've touched some of them earlier in your remediation program versus others, there could be things that you've gotten better at as you've gone through your remediation that maybe you've forgotten about the first 10 technical files that you remediated on your program. And you need to have a second look and ensure that there's something that you haven't missed, or there isn't a disconnect between the first batch of files that you did in your remediation journey and the last batch of files you did in your remediation journey. And that's why I harped a little bit on putting together an audit plan internally. Obviously, you want to be prepared for your notified body and those actual MDR audits, but that internal audit plan and that internal self-check is really critical and will help prevent some of these stumbling blocks we were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Definitely recommend that as well. And we're actually at time now, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. And thank you, Chris, so much for presenting today and answering these questions. Very much appreciated. And then just so everyone knows, if there were any questions that came unanswered, Chris will get a list of those questions and can follow up with you after this. And as a reminder, this session has been recorded. It will be provided at the Virtual Summit website by the end of the week. Tomorrow is day 3 of the summit, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern. And the first session tomorrow is the post-COVID value shift and how medtech companies can capitalize. So if you're interested and you want to register for that, you can use your unique link to log into that. If you haven't registered yet, you can sign up at virtual-summit.greenlight.guru. Thank you again, Chris, for presenting today. Any closing words?
No, Wade, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope that you all stay healthy and well, and you have a successful 2020.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to everyone for joining today and joining our True Quality Virtual Summit. We'll see you all tomorrow, and take care.